Hey guys, and welcome to my latest video. So, I am here at All Saints Church North Ferriby, and I wanted to tell you basically about my 20 years as a musician playing here, because yeah, it's been that long. Now this building was finished, it took 3 years to build, which is incredible at the time actually when you think about it, but it was finished in 1848, and it does have quite an interesting history, but that's not something I'm going to go into right now. It might be another video that I make later on. But this is the building that I've spent the last 20 years playing music in for church services and the like, which I'm going to tell you all about now. So it's just over 20 years ago this year that All Saints Church North Ferriby kind of came into my life. And prior to that, I had been playing at various churches. I'd had quite a lengthy stint at Brantingham Church, of which I'll probably do another video about that at some point, because that is where my organ playing journey began. But it all started when I was doing some private teaching, and the mum of one of my students worked in the church office. And as it happened, they had just lost their organist to All Saints North Ferriby, who, there go the bells, who also happened to be called Lester. I hadn't come across and have never come across anybody else called Lester in all my years of life. So it just so happened that he was the organist here. I'm not sure how long he was organist here for and how long the name Lester has reigned over the organ at North Ferriby. But not only that, but it turned out he was my very first piano teacher back in the days when I started piano lessons above a music shop in Hull for a short period of time. Anyway, the mother of the student who worked in the kind of church office here had mentioned me to the relatively new vicar at the time, Matthew, who got in touch. And he thought it'd be a nice idea to just meet up and go and have a coffee and have a chat. He doesn't really remember this part of it, but I remember it quite vividly because I was obviously quite nervous. It felt like, although it was an informal chat, I kind of felt like it was an interview that I was going into as such. And he'd actually brought his family with his wife and 3 young daughters, very young at the time. So that in a sense did make it feel a little bit more relaxed and less like an interview. And further from that kind of meeting, I was given a trial period from that September for 3 months up until after the Christmas services. And then they would decide what to do after that, whether to kind of continue with me or not, which I found quite a nerve-wracking experience. Like 3 months felt like quite a long period to have a trial for, as opposed to just playing for a service or whatever it might be. So it was quite interesting. It was over that period of time. And during that period of time, like I'd said, I had already been playing at Brantingham Church for a short stint, and I'd already been playing at various other churches, kind of helping out, doing the odd service and weddings and funerals, things like that. So I was fairly kind of comfortable with the kind of things that you did in church at that point. I'd already played quite a considerable amount of hymns and things like that. But when I first came to Ferriby, something that I hadn't done before was a little bit more traditional, in the sense that because they had a church choir, they did things like evensong. And some of the things that they did at evensong were what we call like versicles and responses, or parts of the Bible set to words, set to a melody. And usually how that works for the organist is there is a small set of bars worth of music with all the words that are to be sung to that written underneath. And in those words there are little markers that are basically telling you where to change the chord. Now, usually an organist that has a good memory, which is most of them, barring me, would basically memorize that so they could follow the words and then they'd know exactly when to change the chord. And I just wasn't confident doing that. I wasn't confident in the ability to memorize those things and to just look at the words. So I felt it necessary to literally write the whole thing out. And here we have, as you can see, my 20-year-old handwritten verse version of the Magnificat. My soul doth magnify the Lord, and you can see how normally this would have been, like I say, written on one small sheet of paper like in a hymn book with one small phrase of music and all the words written underneath. And I obviously felt the need to write them all out. So whilst I was doing those, the Magnificat and the Nunc Dimittis were the two main parts of the service like this that I had to play. So you very much relied on listening to everybody around you being led by the choir, kind of singing to know exactly when to change the chords. And depending on the amount of people that have turned up in the congregation and in the choir, that was not always possible. So sometimes I'd have to play them a little bit quieter just so I could hear the singing to know where the chords would change. As I'd done it more and more and more, I got more comfortable in singing it myself whilst I was doing it in an attempt to kind of help lead what was going on with that. So as another part of the Evensong service, which was every month when I first came here, and sometimes there were additional evening services with similar layouts in terms of the music and the liturgy that was spoken and said. But another part of that service music-wise was what we call the versicles and responses. Now normally the choir, who had all these lovely robes on, would have somebody within them called the cantor, who would basically be given a note and he would start the initial part of the music, which is then responded to by the congregation, supported by the choir. And I remember one evening, when I got here, and there was particularly low choir numbers for one reason or another. I think it was illness, basically. And I noticed that this gentleman wasn't here, and neither was the guy who would kind of do it in his place if he was not here. And I was getting a little bit worried, and when it came to playing and doing that part of the service, I remember thinking, right, okay, I'm going to have to give this note, but who am I going to give it to? So I was kind of looking nervously over to the choir, and I could see they were all either trying not to catch my eye attention because they didn't want to have to do it themselves, or were kind of looking as if to say, what are we going to do? And I just thought in that moment, it's going to have to be me. I really didn't want to do it. I was as nervous as anything, but I just thought otherwise nothing is going to happen. So I ended up for the first time doing the cantor role from the organ. But doing these things, I've found, is really good because it helps you to step outside your comfort zone and gives you that confidence for when other things like that come up in the future. So this is the kind of thing that we were doing. So kind of giving you a bit of a reenactment here. I was obviously sat here quietly in the service, panicking, and I had to give the note, and we just went, "O Lord, open thou our lips." And then everybody else kind of joins in with, "And our mouth shall show forth thy praise." And then it keeps going, but thankfully there was the sheet music of the cantor part in my in my music for me to be able to follow. So again, one of those moments that I'm really grateful for, even though I was frightened to death at the time, that I had to kind of push myself into doing. Up until this point, running a choir or an ensemble as such on a regular basis wasn't something that I'd done either. There was a wonderful, lovely lady called Lucy who had run the choir up until that point. But a few months into my time at Ferriby, she had asked if I would kind of take over the choir. So again, it was another one of those things that scared me half to death, because at that point there was a good 15 to 18 people in that choir. But then being responsible for preparing them for weekly services, and they always did an anthem, so a solo choir piece within the service. And if it was a morning service, there would be the Magnificat and responses to prepare, but also preparing special pieces for them to perform during special occasions such as, Easter, Good Friday, Palm Sunday, Advent, and the Christmas services and the like. So again, my early time here, my first year or two, was full of things that I'd never done before, probably never would have done, but I'm really grateful for having kind of been put into the deep end with, in terms of what I felt comfortable with at the time, because they've all kind of lasted through things that I've done later on through the work that I do at school with ensembles and leading brass groups and wind bands and orchestras and things like that. And it gave me that little bit of extra confidence to kind of do those things and at least feel like I knew how to pretend like I knew what I was doing, even if I felt like I didn't at the time. But through doing these things, like the choir here at All Saints, I learnt so much, and obviously met people that I wouldn't ordinarily have met here at church. Because one of the things about being a church musician is that you tend to find that because you play obviously before the service, during the service, and after the service, quite often by the time that you finish playing or packing up or whatever it might be, the majority of people have left. So you tend not to get to speak to a lot of people. So it was a really nice way of meeting some wonderful people that I probably ordinarily wouldn't have done anyway at the service. So prior to me arriving here at North Ferriby, they still had an acoustic or a proper organ. You can see the pipes obviously behind me. It's not a crazy hat, I promise you. And just before it arrived, they had changed the mechanical action, which is always harder to play, heavier to play, on the actual console, which is the keyboard part of the organ. They had changed it from mechanical action to electronic, so it was much easier to play. Prior to this organ, the organs that I generally played had stops where you would physically have to pull out kind of pistons, if you like, that had the names of the sound that you were activating kind of labelled on it. But this one was a little bit different. Not only that, but usually when you play an organ, the actual console itself, the keyboard part of the organ, is usually placed underneath the pipes, which I believe at one time or other this one was. And then the console itself was moved. You find that this happens a lot in churches where entire organs are moved. I know the one at Brantingham was moved in its entirety within the church, but I'll tell you about that in another video. But because usually you are sat beneath the sound, you don't always hear everything because the sound is travelling over you from the pipes. But the organ itself, which obviously you've seen already, is here. And in relation to the pipes, there's a fair kind of distance over there from where it is. Now the problem with the acoustic, the old-fashioned organs, which I love, acoustic in many ways is always better than digital. But there does come a point where that's not the case for one main and very big reason, and that is finances. Those kind of organs were so expensive to maintain, never mind have them tuned. And it had got to the point where it needed so much work doing on it, like many church organs, and it was failing us so many times. I'd turn up to a funeral, and sometimes there would be what we call a cipher sound, kind of a whistling sound that comes through the instrument. Sometimes it would be associated with like a particular stop or a particular note. So sometimes you were able to not use that particular stop or sound to stop the kind of whistling coming through. But there were times where that just wasn't possible, and I would have to kind of run onto the piano and use that, which obviously, particularly for things like weddings and funerals, isn't what people were wanting to hear. So one of our choir members, Marigold, paid for the organ to be replaced, in effect, by a digital console. So now, although we still have those kind of wonderful organ pipes at the end there, nothing comes out of them anymore. They're just for show. But there are speakers around the church which project the sound of the organ. And quite often, if somebody's new to the church and they don't know the history of the organ, have no idea at all that it isn't a real organ. So the organ was used for the majority of the services, and we did have a service less frequently where we would use the piano. Again, we had an old acoustic piano here that had this strange kind of metallic plate in it, which effectively somehow amplified it. I'm not quite sure how it worked or how effective it was, but it was a very old piano. It was in need of a lot of work, and again, very tired. So there was a point where we managed to replace that. And then, not long after, I can't remember exactly when, but we had a new sound system put into the church, which had in view, as well as all the other things that it was going to be used for, to be used for a music group which we were wanting to try and grow and use more frequently. So we bought a digital piano, which would then be able to go through the system. The problem with the acoustic piano was the sound was all around just that piano area. So it might seem quite loud to somebody that was close by to it, but somebody sat at the back of the church wouldn't hear it as much. And if you're not hearing the music or the accompaniment to the hymns very loud, the chances are as you sing up to the volume of what you can hear. And we were also very lucky that around about that time, a gentleman that attended the church had a drum kit at his house which belonged to his son, who I believe didn't really play it very much. So he donated it to the church, which was great, which then gave us the opportunity to really start kind of building on a music group, because prior to that we didn't really have a music group as such, apart from special occasions where somebody might come and play the clarinet or whatever it might be. But at this point we had a firm basis of drums just over here, and then we would have the keyboard, which is hiding under there. So one of the other things that I introduced fairly early on here was the introduction to using brass instruments in the Christmas carol service. I think everybody associates brass with Christmas carols and things like that. And at the time it just started off by inviting students that I taught or had taught at school, and they would come and join in and play with all the carols. And that has continued every year ever since. And it's always been a mixture of people that I know, and Nick, who is in our music group now, who's an amazing trumpeter, plays the last post and or the descants in the Christmas carols that none of the rest of us want to play because they're too hard. And ex-students, friends, and people like that. So it's been really nice to introduce that, and since then as well, introducing kind of guest vocalists that will come and sing a solo during special services, perhaps like Good Friday, or again like the carol services. And as I'd said before, I have played at other churches prior to being at North Ferriby, but I wasn't a Christian. And in a nutshell, I hadn't really related to anything that I'd heard, didn't really understand any of it. And though my mum had been a Christian before she died, I think that coupled with not understanding how God could allow bad things to happen, it just meant nothing to me. And I remember when I came here, it didn't take very long before Matthew, the vicar, had kind of invited me round to his house. He said it'd be good to have a chat, and this chat ended up being a weekly chat, which would often last for 2 hours. And he basically just over a long period of time, which was so nice of him, just basically allowed me to ask questions about Christianity, understanding God, understanding why bad things happen and suffering, and going through parts of the Bible. He then invited me to a Christianity Explored course, which he then ran from his house. And ultimately, it ended up in me deciding to get baptized. So not only is this the church that I've been at for 20 years, and God willing will be for the next 20, it's also the church that I came to faith and got baptized at. Now, as many of us will remember, a few years ago we had the dreaded lockdown, which obviously put an end to all live music, church services eventually, as that was one of the last things to be taken away. So we ended up going online. And I think various churches did this in all sorts of different ways. But we were very lucky to have a guy called Jim, who hailed all the way from Scotland. There was no need to have put that part in. Who was so good with his tech, and to this day now physically records our services and puts them all online. So they're definitely worth checking out on the North Ferriby website on online services. But at the time, he was putting together kind of full services with a recorded sermon in from our Vicar Matthew. And I also started then producing music videos, in effect, of hymns and worship songs and things like that. I honestly can't remember how many I did, but it was a lot, to the point where I started getting as inventive as I possibly could with them. I remember a couple stand out. One was O Come, Emmanuel, which I decided to sing in several vocal parts, but I thought because of the time of year that it was for, that it would sound pretty cool, or look pretty cool even, if I was holding an actual candle for each one of them. Or I can't remember if I was holding it or if it was just there. But I do remember getting through so many amounts of the vocal parts and thinking, why on earth have I started doing it like this? Because it took me absolutely ages and drove me insane. But I am glad that I got to the end of that. Another one was a more children's-based worship song. I can't even remember the name of it now. Nope. Anyway, and I did some silly daft things on there as well.
Hello everybody! Hello, my name's Rudolph. Build a snowman!
Guys, it's not that one yet!
Come
Sing
on!
your song,
Let the Christmas tree remind you of the one who trusts the Lord, who walks the path of godliness and loves to hear God's word. Pray that as you grow up, that's just how you will be, standing tall for Jesus like a Christmas tree. Let your love show, ho, ho, let your faith grow, ho, ho, that everyone will know Christ the King of Christmas. So that took us quite a while of not playing live until we kind of came back into the church. When we came back to church, there were still limitations, like on sharing Holy Communion, things like that, which was understandable. But one of the other things that we couldn't do was sing. However, those who led the worship, be it the musicians or the vicar, were allowed to. So that was the point at which we basically introduced singing in the music group. And at that point, it was basically for the congregation to listen to. So instead of just playing a video, they could actually still hear the live music, but hear it being sung, but weren't allowed to sing it themselves. And obviously, as the restrictions were lifted, it just stayed, and it just became a way of supporting the music and the singing of the hymns and worship songs during services. And during that time, prior to lockdown, we had 2 services on a Sunday morning. We had a 9 o'clock and we had a 10:30. But obviously that had to be looked at when we came back out of lockdown, and the decision was kind of eventually made to just stick to 1 service. So the focus became more on the music group playing rather than the organ. I will play the organ if it's for a special occasion, like if it's Remembrance Sunday, things like that. But then the focus became, like I say, more on the music group. So we've got Hugh on drums and tech, and generally making sure that all our lights are charged and that he puts together a nice format of the music that I've chosen for before and after the service and for during communion. And we've got Naomi, who sings wonderfully and also plays the flute, and as I've mentioned earlier, Nick joins us sometimes as well. I was actually thinking the other day, I wonder how many services I've played for over the years. Now, just thinking back on my time here so far, there is a guy called Terry Wallace, fabulous organist, who has, in all my time here, both supported the music here by playing once a month for me to have a Sunday off, for supporting with conducting the choir and rehearsing them sometimes, and doing all sorts of other things. So I'm eternally grateful to Terry and his talents and the time that he gives to us. So counting the fact that I had 1 Sunday off a month, I calculated that I've probably played over 1,100 services. But when I made that calculation, actually, I didn't count for the fact that we used to do 2 services on a Sunday morning, as I mentioned earlier, as opposed to 1. Or the even songs. So perhaps it's more like 1,500, maybe even more. I don't know. But it's a lot. So things like thinking about having been here for like 20 years and played 1,500 odd services starts to make you feel old. Okay, so that is the end of my journey. I mean, there's so much more I could tell you, but I don't want to bore you for any longer than I already have. If you've made it this far, so far, that makes no sense. Anyway, I appreciate you watching the video. I shall link my Being a Church Musician at Christmas video at the end of this one, so do take a look at that. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, whatever else it is they do these days on these things. So I shall leave you with one of my favourite hymns to play on the organ, which is, and it's a very fitting time of year to be playing this, Crown Him with Many Crowns. See you later, guys.